1977. Star Wars was blowing up the theaters. Elvis officially left the building, and everyone was wearing polyester. In music, the rules were gone. You had some bands chasing perfection, all the while you had other bands not giving a, well, you know. It was polished, chaotic, political, and wild, all at once. And that's exactly what we're going to be getting into with this documentary. 12 albums, so wildly different that they might as well have been released in different eras. So with that being said, let's rock. By 1977, Steely Dan had given up on being a traditional band. Donald Fagen and Walter Becker decided live shows were just silly little distractions. They turned themselves into a studio-only duo, perfectionists building records from the ground up. Asia is their crown jewel. They brought in more than 40 session legends: Steve Gadd, Wayne Shorter, Larry Carlton, Joe Sample. They even brought in Michael McDonald. If you weren't flawless, you were replaced. Guitarist Larry Carlton later said you'd come in, play, and maybe never hear from them again. They wanted exactly what they wanted. Engineer Roger Nichols, nicknamed the Immortal, was the third brain in the room. He built custom equipment to clean tape hiss and insisted every take be as close to perfect as technology allowed. He would once say they wanted perfection, but not sterile perfection. It still had to feel alive. The title track, Asia, is a 9-minute jazz fusion journey, capped by Steve Gadd's legendary drum solo, done in just 2 takes. Becker joked, "We planned to spend all day on it. Steve ruined our schedule by being too good." Peg is smooth pop on the surface, but Michael McDonald nearly lost his voice recording the layered backing vocals. "I thought they were torturing me," he said, "but when I heard it back, it was glass." Deacon Blues was Becker and Fagen fantasizing about being losers with style. Fagen explained, "They got a name for the winners in the world. I want a name when I lose." Critics called the album a masterpiece. Some fans thought it was a little too polished. But aside from those few detractors, it won a Grammy, sold millions, and remains the record engineers used to test hi-fi systems. It's Steely Dan at their most, well, Dan. Brainy, introspective, and nerdy. In other words, perfect. Rumours was the album that turned chaos into harmony. By 1977, Fleetwood Mac were global stars, but behind the scenes, the band was imploding. Christine and John McVie had divorced, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham had split, and Mick Fleetwood's marriage had collapsed. But yet everyone was still in the same studio, being super passive-aggressive to each other. Producer King Calais said something like Rumours could never happen today. A label would have shut us down after 2 weeks of fighting. Dreams came quickly. Stevie wrote it in 10 minutes on the floor of the studio. It was the only song that easy, she said. Lindsey turned it into a tight, glossy track, even though it was about him. Lindsey fired back with Go Your Own Way. Stevie absolutely detested the lyric, "Shacking up's all you want to do." She called it unfair, but she still sang the harmonies, through gritted teeth, I'm sure. Christine McVie wrote Don't Stop for her ex-husband John, who, you guessed it, had to play bass on it. She also brought Songbird, which is considered to be one of the most tender moments on the record. The Chain was the only true group composition, and a personal favorite of mine from this album. Pieced together from different ideas, It became a symbol of the band at the time. The chain did keep them together, for better or for worse. And then there's Silver Springs, Stevie's lost masterpiece, cut because it was too long. They buried my best song, she would go on to say. Decades later, performing it live, she called that her revenge. Despite the tales of destruction and dysfunction, Rumours came out polished, hook-filled, and universal. Mick Fleetwood would sum it up. We were all going through hell, but the music was our lifeline. 40 million copies later, it's still one of the best-selling albums ever made. Right. The Sex Pistols. Well, they completely destroyed everything in the best way possible. Never mind the Bollocks is one of the most notorious debuts in history. One album, 1 year, and they were done. Producer Chris Thomas and engineer Bill Price were unlikely parents to punk rock anarchy. Thomas had worked with the Beatles and Roxy Music. Sid Vicious barely played. Steve Jones handled almost all of the bass along with guitar. Jones admitted later, "We were useless musicians, but we had attitude. Chris made us sound like gods." Meanwhile, you have Johnny Rotten, who snarled his way through every track with a sort of proficiency of a psycho poet. Songs like Anarchy in the UK and God Save the Queen were tabloid scandals. The BBC banned them, and then sales skyrocketed. God Save the Queen hit number 2 on the charts, though many believe it was deliberately kept from number 1 to avoid embarrassment during the Queen's Jubilee. The album runs barely 40 minutes. It's crude, it's loud, it's sneering, and yet it's produced with enough punch to make it endure. Some said punk died the moment it was made this clean. Others argue it was punk's one true bombshell. Either way, it changed rock forever. The band Styx were chasing stadium dreams on the heels of their EP Crystal Ball. But on July 7th, 1977, that's 77, they released The Grand Illusion, the album that made them true arena rock kings. Dennis DeYoung set the theme in the title track. Fame and success are illusions. Guitarist James Young reflected later, "You think success changes you, but really it's the world around you that changes." Come Sail Away is the centerpiece of this album by far, a gentle piano ballad that blasts into cosmic rock theatrics. Tommy Shaw's incredible vocals on Fooling Yourself was actually written about DeYoung, encouraging him not to doubt himself. Producer Barry Mraz and engineer Rob Kingsland gave the record a balance, polished, but, powerful. Prog rock, not so much. But arena rock anthems on a piece of wax? Absolutely. The album went triple platinum, but more importantly, it gave Styx their philosophy. Enjoy the success, but know it's a mirage. It's theatrical and sincere, and it absolutely 100% cemented Styx's place in the late 70s arena rock pantheon. By 1977, Pink Floyd were one of the biggest bands in the world. Dark Side of the Moon had almost certainly upped the ante. Wish You Were Here proved it wasn't a fluke. But instead of basking in the fame, Roger Waters turned bitter. He looked at Britain's crumbling economy, social unrest, and political cynicism, and decided to write up an album that held up a very ugly mirror. Animals was recorded in their own new Britannia Row studios, which ironically had less sophisticated gear than the places they'd used before. Engineer Brian Humphreys said, We actually had cruder equipment than on Wish You Were Here, but maybe that's what gave Animals its grit. The concept was brutal. Society divided into three kinds of people: dogs, greedy cutthroat businessmen; pigs, corrupt leaders; and sheep, passive masses blindly following. The 17-minute Dogs is a David Gilmour showcase with one of his most revered guitar solos at the end. Soaring, mournful, angry. Pigs, three different ones, name-checked Mary Whitehouse, a British moral crusader who had campaigned against obscenity. Waters didn't hold back. He mocked her very directly. Sheep reworked Psalm 23, twisting the prayer into a sort of satirical attack on blind faith. However, when it came out, reviews were mixed. Some critics call it bleak and joyless. Fans, though, they knew that it was essential Floyd, ambitious and uncompromising. Waters himself would later say that the 70s were ugly. Animals was us holding up a mirror. It may not be as instantly beloved as Dark Side or Wish You Were Here, but it's the one that most bluntly told you what Floyd, or at least Waters, thought of the world. Cheap Trick were busy kicking out razor-sharp power pop in bowling alleys and local halls. Their debut album, however, released in early 1977, did not make them stars overnight. But it would plant the seeds of their cult following, especially in Japan, where audiences latched onto them immediately. Produced by Jack Douglas, who worked with Aerosmith, this album has a wiry, sort of punk-adjacent energy, but with more melody and wit. Rick Nielsen's songs dripped with sarcasm. ELO Kitties was a sneer at teenage rebellion. Taxman Mr. Thief mocked greed and corruption, while Hot Love proved they could deliver straightforward rock when they wanted to. Douglas would later call the sessions sonic gold, sharp, dynamic, bursting with life. But in America, critics loved them more than the radio programmers did. Bassist Tom Peterson put it bluntly: "We were part Beatles, part Who, part punk. Nobody knew what to do with us." Japan, on the other hand, knew exactly what to do with them. The debut album made them heroes overseas, setting the stage for At Budokan in 1978, the live record that finally broke them in the United States. Looking back, this debut has everything Cheap Trick would be famous for: irreverent humor and arena-ready hooks. In 1976, Rush released 2112, and they went from near drop status to prog rock saviors. The follow-up, A Farewell to Kings in 1977, was proof that they weren't just lucky. They went to Rockfield Studios in Wales, a residential farm studio that gave them freedom to experiment. Producer Terry Brown, their trusted ally, recalled, "Rockfield had these strange echo rooms, and you could record outdoors. It was the perfect place for what they were doing." The title track begins with classical guitar, actually recorded in the courtyard, with birds audible in the background. Geddy Lee would explain, "We mic'd it outside to capture that natural space." Then the band crashes in with complexity, power, and precision. Xanadu is an 11-minute prog epic, inspired by Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem. If you don't know him, check him out. It's pretty cool stuff. Alex Lifeson's layered guitars, Neil Peart's bells, chimes, and percussion, Geddy's synths. It's Rush at their most ambitious. Closer to the Heart is the opposite. Short, direct, and surprisingly accessible. Geddy later said, "It's the only one of our albums from that period that I can really live with. It still sounds so positive." The record ends with the song Cygnus X1, a space odyssey that cuts off mid-narrative to be continued on their next album, Hemispheres. only Rush would end a record with a cliffhanger. A Farewell to Kings cracked the UK Top 40 and cemented Rush's global presence. It's the sound of a band building worlds bigger than the fan base could have ever imagined. AC/DC was a band who already had a couple of releases behind them, but Let There Be Rock is the album where AC/DC truly became the band we know today. It was also the last record with bassist Mark Evans, but the real story here is Bon, Angus, and Malcolm in full stride. Producer Harry Vanda kept things raw, letting the amps roar. No polish, no subtlety. The title track is practically scripture. Bon Scott, in preacher mode, declares, before launching into a firestorm riff. Angus Young later said, "That song told people exactly who we were." Whole Lotta Rosie is yet another highlight. Bon's ode to an unforgettable woman. He used to introduce it live by saying, "This song is about a big girl, and I mean big." It became one of AC/DC's defining anthems. At the time, critics sneered. Too crude, too dumb, but that was the genius. They weren't trying to impress journalists. They were trying to blow roofs off bars and clubs. And it worked. Let There Be Rock was AC/DC's blueprint. No ballads, no experimental anything. It was just pure, sweaty rock and roll. The Clash were punk's conscience. Their debut, released in the UK in April of '77, was raw, furious, and, unlike the Sex Pistols, political. Guitarist Joe Strummer said, "We wanted to play rock and roll, but we wanted to say something." And they did. White Riot called out class inequality. Career Opportunities mocked Britain's dead-end jobs. London's Burning captured the frustration of youth staring down unemployment and boredom. Producer Mickey Foote recorded the whole thing in 3 weeks. The budget was tiny. The energy was massive, though. Paul Simonon's bass and Mick Jones's guitar gave the songs surprising depth. Strummer's vocals were ragged, but that was the point. Musically, it wasn't one-dimensional. Reggae and dub rhythms crept in thanks to the band's love of Jamaican sound systems. That would become the Clash's signature, punk fire fused with global influences. When it came out in the UK, it was an instant classic. The US release didn't arrive till 1979, 2 years later, with a different track list. But by then, the Clash had already earned the nickname The Only Band That Matters. The Pistols may have gotten the headlines, but the Clash gave punk its heart, its brains, and honestly, it gave it its staying power. October 17th, 1977, Lynyrd Skynyrd released Street Survivors. 3 days later, though, their plane crashed in Mississippi, killing Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, and Cassie Gaines. The album instantly became both a triumph and a memory enshrined with tragedy. Producer Tom Dowd had pushed the band to tighten their sound, and with Steve Gaines, the new guitarist and songwriter, they had leveled up. Ronnie Van Zant said of Gaines, "This kid's gonna make us rich." What's Your Name and You Got That Right were upbeat, radio ready. I Know a Little, written by Gaines, showed off his jazzy, playful style. But the most haunting track was That Smell, a warning about excess and recklessness. Lines like, "The smell of death surrounds you," hit chillingly hard after the crash. Engineer Kevin Elson remembered skeptics doubting Steve Gaines until he stepped in the studio and tore through Call Me the Breeze. They never doubted him again. The original cover showed the band surrounded by flames. Of course, after the crash, MCA quickly replaced it out of respect. The flames, though, it became an eerie symbol of what was lost. Street Survivors went platinum, and it absolutely froze the band at their peak.
Well, you're just 17, all you wanna do is disappear.
Queen had delivered 2 ornate Baroque rock records. With News of the World, they stripped everything down, and they opened with a 1-2 combo that would echo through stadiums forever. We will rock you, and we are the champions. Brian May said he wanted a song that audiences could stomp and clap to. He got it. Then Freddie Mercury followed with We Are the Champions, part anthem, part personal declaration. Together they became inseparable. The universal soundtrack to sports victories. But the album actually had more range than just those 2 songs. Spread Your Wings, written by bassist John Deacon, is a gentle ballad of encouragement. Roger Taylor's Sheer Heart Attack, again, my favorite song off this record, written years earlier, was a blast of proto-punk. And Get Down, Make Love was Freddie at his most theatrical and kinky, complete with psychedelic tape effects from engineer Mike Stone. The record also included It's Late, one of Brian May's most underrated guitar epics. He actually used a tapping technique before Eddie Van Halen made it famous. The album would go on to sell over 4 million copies, but more importantly, it showed Queen weren't locked into one style. They could be grandiose one moment, raw the next. Always, always unmistakably Queen. So now we stumble onto Bowie's Berlin year. After escaping the horrors of Los Angeles, he holed up in West Berlin with Iggy Pop, Brian Eno, and producer Tony Visconti. Out of that came the Berlin Trilogy. The second installment, Heroes, is its absolute beating heart. Recorded at Hansa Studios just steps from the Berlin Wall, the album soaks in the city's tension. Brian Eno brought synthesizers and experimental textures, and Robert Fripp dropped in and just recorded his iconic guitar lines in a single night, like you do. The title track was inspired when Bowie saw Tony Visconti embracing his girlfriend near the wall. Bowie later explained, "It was lovers kissing in the shadow of that looming structure. It became an anthem for defiance." Other tracks were stranger. Joe the Lion referenced performance artist Chris Burton. I don't know who that is. Sons of the Silent Age was surreal and detached. V2 Schneider nodded to Kraftwerk and Bowie's obsession with German electronic music. At first, the reviews were sort of mixed. It was too cold, too weird. But over time, Heroes became one of Bowie's most beloved records. Even U2 would go on to cite it as a huge influence. The title track alone turned into a global anthem, proof that even in bleakness, you can find beauty. Bowie later said, "Berlin was the greatest artistic experience of my life, and Heroes is the purest artifact of that era. Atmospheric, poetic, and unforgettable." So that was the year in rock, 1977. What do you think of my choices for the rock albums of this year? Do you agree with them? Or are you aggressively against them? Just let me know down below in the comments. And make sure you click that subscribe button down below as well. So here's to 1977, the year music refused to pick one lane and decided to drive down all of them at once.